The little girl burst into tears at school, screaming that her grandmother was dying. No one believed her. Teachers thought she was acting out, until a Navy SEAL on leave discovered a truth far darker than anyone imagined. A home on the edge of the forest. A child hiding her terror. And enemies from her father's past closing in. What happened next is something many call a miracle, one only God could have arranged. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, and subscribe for more stories of faith, courage, and the miracles God hides in the darkest places. Snow fell in slow, unhurried silence over the rooftops of Fairbanks, Alaska, the kind of stillness that made even the most restless souls quiet down. Ethan Walker, a Navy SEAL on temporary leave, stood on the small porch of a rented cabin at the edge of town, coffee steaming in his gloved hands. He had spent years moving from one deployment to another, from desert heat to frozen coasts, and he had thought that this winter would be his first chance to breathe. The mission briefings were gone, the radio was silent, and for the first time in a long time, he could listen to nothing but the wind. Yet peace never came easily to men who had seen too much. Beside him sat Rex, his German shepherd partner. The dog was disciplined even in stillness, eyes scanning the horizon as if waiting for a command that would never come. Ethan had rescued Rex years earlier after a failed operation overseas that had left both of them wounded. Since then, they shared an unspoken pact. Each owed the other his life, and neither would ever walk away. That morning, the cabin phone rang, a sound that startled Ethan more than it should have. On the other end was Emily Coggins, an old acquaintance from his hometown days before the Navy. She had become an elementary school teacher in Fairbanks. Her tone was casual, almost embarrassed, as she asked if he could stop by to look at the old heating unit in her classroom. "It's freezing in here," she said. "The school district's been slow with repairs, and the kids can't sit still when their fingers turn blue." Ethan agreed without hesitation. Helping out gave him purpose, even for a day. By noon, he and Rex arrived at Oakwood Elementary, a modest brick building half buried in snowdrifts. The hallways were filled with children's laughter and the faint scent of crayons. But amid the cheerful noise, Ethan noticed something odd. One classroom door stood ajar, and inside silence hung heavy. Emily greeted him at the doorway, her cheeks pink from the cold. She looked both grateful and distracted. "Thanks for coming," she said, motioning toward the heating vent. "It's been acting up for weeks. The kids are freezing." While Ethan examined the system, he couldn't ignore a faint sound from behind the desks. A soft sobbing. He looked up, and Emily sighed quietly. "That's Lily Rosewood," she said, lowering her voice. "She's been like that for days. She keeps saying her grandmother's dying. We've tried to explain that talking like that scares the other kids, but she won't stop. Today, I had to send her out of group time again. I don't think she's doing it on purpose, but—" Her words trailed off. Ethan turned slightly to see the child, small, pale, huddled under her desk with her arms wrapped around her knees. She wasn't crying loudly, just whispering something over and over. "She's going to die soon. Nobody believes me." Something in that voice stirred memories Ethan had buried deep. Those moments in battle when someone cried out for help and command ignored it. The helplessness, the frustration, the certainty that you were hearing truth when everyone else dismissed it. He crouched down and spoke gently. "Hey there, I'm Ethan. Rex and I are fixing your heater. It's too cold to sit on the floor, don't you think?" Lily looked up, eyes wide but guarded. "It's not the cold. My grandma's really sick. Nobody believes me. They say I'm lying." Her words were quiet but firm. Emily shifted uneasily. "She says that every day," she explained softly. "Her father's in prison. The grandmother takes care of her. I've tried calling home, but the number's always disconnected." Ethan studied the child again, this time not as a passerby, but as someone reading a battlefield. Fear was carved into every movement she made, not the fear of punishment, but of loss. "She's not lying," he said quietly. "She's scared." After the class ended, he helped Emily fix the heating system, though his mind wasn't on the tools. When she thanked him, he hesitated before asking, "What's going to happen to that girl if her grandmother really is sick?" Emily looked weary. "Child services would get involved, I suppose, but I can't file a report based on a child's imagination. You know how many times we hear stories like that?" Ethan nodded, though his jaw tightened. "Yeah," he said, "I know how often people ignore what they shouldn't." As he stepped back into the parking lot, the late afternoon light had turned golden, reflecting off the snowbanks. Rex trotted beside him, quiet as always. "We've seen too many lies that were truth," Ethan muttered. The dog tilted his head slightly, as if he understood. That night, back at the cabin, Ethan couldn't sleep. The image of the little girl whispering to herself under the desk kept returning. He poured another cup of coffee and stared out the window, watching flakes drift across the glass. Rex stirred from his corner and padded over, resting his head on Ethan's knee. "She's just a kid," Ethan said, "but she sounded like someone who's been alone too long." He set down his mug and exhaled slowly. He'd told himself he was on leave, no orders, no rescues, no interference. Yet even off-duty, the part of him trained to protect wouldn't rest. Somewhere in that quiet town, a child was telling the truth that no one wanted to hear. And somewhere, an old woman might be lying sick and forgotten. Ethan looked at Rex, whose ears perked up, waiting. "We'll just check in tomorrow," he said, half to the dog and half to himself. "Nothing official, just to make sure she's not alone." Rex gave a low, approving rumble, as if the decision had already been made. Outside, the snow kept falling, soft, endless, and mercilessly white. The world was still, but Ethan Walker knew peace would have to wait a little longer. Morning came gray and bitter, the kind of Alaska cold that turned breath into frost before it left your lips. Ethan Walker parked his truck near Oakwood Elementary, telling himself he was only there to return a wrench he'd left the day before. But deep down, he knew that wasn't true. Something about the girl, Lily, had lodged in his mind through the night. Her voice had echoed with the same raw fear he'd heard from civilians during missions gone wrong. People who saw danger long before help ever arrived. As he stepped out with Rex beside him, the school bell rang, sharp and metallic in the frozen air. Inside, children rushed through the hallways, chattering and laughing, but one sound cut through the noise. A teacher's stern voice followed by a small gasp. Ethan moved toward it almost without thinking. Through the half-open classroom door, he saw Lily standing by the blackboard, trembling. Her small hands clutched a piece of chalk, while the rest of the class watched in uneasy silence. Emily Coggins stood nearby, her expression tight, caught between frustration and guilt. "Lily," she said in a low but firm tone, "you can't keep saying things like that. It scares the other children. No one is dying." The little girl shook her head. tears filling her eyes. "But she is. Grandma can't breathe sometimes, and she sleeps all day. I tried to wake her up last night, but she wouldn't move." Her voice broke, desperate and sincere. Emily rubbed her temples, clearly exhausted. "Lily, you're imagining it. You need to stop lying, or you'll spend the rest of the day outside." Ethan's jaw tightened. He could tell the teacher wasn't cruel. She was simply overwhelmed. Still, he stepped inside, clearing his throat. "Emily," he said evenly, "mind if I have a word?" She turned, startled but not surprised. "Ethan, this isn't what it looks like. She's been saying these things every day." He nodded, eyes on the girl. "Yeah, but what if this time she's right?" Lily's head lifted, and for the first time she met his gaze not with fear, but with recognition. "You believe me," she whispered. Ethan crouched to her level. "I think you're scared for a reason, and I think we should find out why." Rex moved closer, sitting beside the child as if to confirm his master's words. The class watched, their earlier curiosity softening into silence. Emily sighed. "Ethan, I can't just—" "Then let me," he interrupted gently. "I'm off duty. I've got time. I'll check on her grandmother this afternoon." There was something in his tone that didn't invite argument, and Emily finally nodded. The bell rang again, signaling recess. The children filed out, leaving Lily behind, clutching her small backpack like a shield. Ethan turned to her. "What's your grandma's name?" "Martha," she said quietly. "Martha Rosewood. Our house is near the forest road, the one with the mailbox that—" "Leans!" Her voice wavered. "Please don't tell anyone. If they find out, they'll take me away." The fear in that plea hit Ethan harder than the cold. He remembered being deployed in foreign villages where children hid not from bombs, but from officials who came with paperwork and no mercy. "No one's taken you anywhere," he said softly. "I'm just going to make sure she's okay." Rex barked once, short and low, like a promise sealed. As Ethan left the classroom, he caught Emily's worried glance. "You're taking this seriously?" she asked. "More than you think," he replied. That afternoon he drove past the edge of town, the snow deepening with every mile. The address Lily had given was barely legible on the leaning mailbox, but it was enough. Rex whined softly, sensing tension. "Easy," Ethan murmured. "We're not breaking doors today." He parked, stepped out, and walked toward the old cabin half hidden among bare trees. A faint curl of smoke rose from the chimney, too weak to mean warmth. When he knocked, no answer came, only the distant creak of wind through frozen wood. He circled the house and peered through a window. Inside, an elderly woman sat slumped on a couch, eyes closed, a blanket slipping from her shoulders. Lily's words flashed back. I tried to wake her, but she wouldn't move. For a second, panic gripped him. Then he saw her chest rise slightly, shallow, but steady. Relief washed through him, but it didn't last. Something was deeply wrong here. He returned to the truck, unsure what line he was about to cross. This wasn't his mission, wasn't his jurisdiction, yet his instincts screamed louder than protocol. He couldn't drive away. The child's voice echoed again. "Nobody believes me." He looked at Rex. The dog was alert, eyes fixed on the cabin as if understanding the decision forming in Ethan's mind. "We'll come back tomorrow," Ethan said finally. "Bring food, maybe a few supplies, just to make sure they're safe." Rex gave a quiet sound, half growl, half sigh, and rested his head on the dashboard. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the cabin's shadow stretched long across the snow, dark and still. Ethan started the engine, but his thoughts stayed behind with the little girl and the woman too weak to answer her knock. He didn't know it yet, but this small act of concern would drag him into a storm far more dangerous than the one outside, and the real battle hadn't even begun. The late afternoon light settled over the snowy forest edges, quiet and pale, as Ethan Walker drove back toward the rosewood cabin with Rex in the passenger seat. The truck heater hummed softly, doing little to ease the heaviness in his chest. He had spent most of the day thinking about Lily's trembling voice, about the way she clung to her fear as if it were the only truth she could still trust. And he had spent even longer thinking about the grandmother, slumped, unmoving, hidden away in that cold house like someone forgotten by the world. The wind sharpened as he turned onto the narrow forest road. Rex lifted his head, alert in that uncanny way that came from years of instinct and training. Ethan glanced at him. "Yeah, I know. Doesn't feel right, does it?" The dog didn't look away from the windshield. When they arrived, the house seemed even smaller than the day before, its windows dim, its porch sagging under fresh snow. Ethan knocked, waited, knocked again. No answer. He exhaled slowly, pushing the door open when it gave beneath his hand. Inside, the air felt cold and stale. A faint, uneven breathing came from the couch where Martha still sat, slumped. She hadn't moved since yesterday, and the sight tightened something deep inside him. He placed the grocery bags on the small kitchen table, canned soup, bread, fruit, tea. He had also brought cleaning supplies, unsure whether he was overstepping or too late to matter. Rex sat near the doorway as if guarding something unseen, watching every shadow. Ethan crouched beside the old woman, speaking softly. "Martha, can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered, but she didn't wake. Her breathing remained shallow. She wasn't dying, not yet, but she was drifting in a dangerous place between exhaustion and collapse. This wasn't neglect by choice. It was neglect born from age, illness, and isolation. Lily had been right all along. He turned to the kitchen. The sink was stacked with dishes. Half-eaten food had molded on a plate. There were piles of newspapers scattered across the floor and blankets that smelled of sickness and cold. It would take hours to make the house livable again. But Ethan had time, and he had stubbornness, and he had a promise he didn't fully understand yet. He rolled up his sleeves, an instinct as natural to him as chambering around before entering a hostile building, and set to work. He washed dishes, scrubbed surfaces, opened windows to let fresh air in despite the cold. He swept floors, replaced blankets, filled the wood stove with logs, and searched the cupboards for anything spoiled that might worsen Martha's condition. Rex patrolled the rooms slowly, stopping occasionally to sniff at corners as if mapping the emotional terrain of the home. Ethan paused once to rest his hand on the dog's head. "Yeah, buddy, they've been alone for a long time." While cleaning a small table by the hallway, Ethan found something that made him stop. A single crayon drawing taped crookedly on the wall. A stick-figure child with messy yellow hair held hands with an older woman. Above their heads, in shaky letters, Lily had written, "Me and Grandma, only us." He stared at the words longer than he meant to. "Only us," he murmured. That kind of childhood-carved scars invisible to everyone but the one carrying them. He had seen it in places far from here, in refugee camps, in collapsing villages, in broken cities. Children who held their entire world together with tiny hands. Children who grew old in their hearts long before their bodies had the chance. Lily was one of them, and she was only 5. He finished cleaning and moved to the kitchen to prepare something simple. Soup warmed on the stove, toast in the oven. The smell of heat and food seeped into the rooms, replacing the heavy stillness. Martha stirred faintly, as if her body recognized the return of something familiar. Care. Ethan helped her sit up just enough to drink a few sips of warm broth, steadying her gently. Her eyes opened once, unfocused, drifting past him as though searching a memory she couldn't reach. "It's all right," he said softly. "You're not alone." It took nearly 2 hours to restore the house into something safe, something human. When Ethan stepped outside again, the sky had shifted from pale blue to early dusk. The forest shadows lengthened like dark fingers reaching across the snow. Rex walked beside him, calm but alert. As they reached the truck, Ethan heard a small, hesitant voice behind him. "You came back." He turned. Lily stood at the edge of the path, her backpack still slung over her shoulder as if she had run straight from school. Snow clung to her boots. Her eyes searched his face with disbelief and relief tangled together. "Of course," Ethan said. "I told you I'd check on your grandmother." Her small hands twisted into her coat sleeves. Is she gone?" "No," he answered gently. "She's very tired, but she's alive." The girl nodded, eyes watering but shoulders easing as though the weight of the world had shifted slightly. "Nobody believed me," she whispered, "even when I said she couldn't wake up. They all said I was lying." Ethan crouched to look her in the eyes. "You weren't lying. You were brave, and someone should have listened sooner." She blinked quickly and glanced toward the house. "I can go inside now?" "Yeah," he said softly. "It's safe." But before she stepped forward, she looked back at him again. Something fragile lay in that gaze, something that reached straight into the place inside Ethan he thought war had hardened beyond repair. "Thank you," she whispered, "for helping us." He swallowed the sudden tightness in his throat and opened the door for her. Inside, she rushed to her grandmother's side, touching the woman's hand with a tenderness that belonged to someone far older than her age. Ethan watched silently for a moment before returning to the kitchen and leaving 2 bags of food on the table. As he stepped outside to leave, Rex halted beside him, ears raised. The dog stared toward the distant tree line. Ethan followed his gaze, seeing nothing but the deepening dusk. Still, something felt wrong, something in the air, an unease that prickled at the back of his neck. Rex rarely reacted without reason. Ethan locked the cabin door behind him and looked once more at the forest before starting the truck. "We'll check back tomorrow," he said quietly, "just in case." Rex didn't move his eyes from the trees as the truck pulled away, and neither did Ethan. Something was waiting out there, something that hadn't shown its face yet. But he could feel it coming. Snow pressed heavily against the night sky above the rosewood cabin, its weight muffling every distant sound, turning the woods into a silent maze of shadows. Ethan Walker returned the next evening with Rex, intending only to drop off a few groceries and check on Martha's condition. He expected a quiet visit, nothing more than a routine welfare check he had created for himself. But from the moment he stepped out of the truck, Rex's posture changed. The dog stiffened, nose lifted, muscles taut, eyes locked on the cabin, as if something inside the darkness pulsed with danger. Ethan rested his gloved hand lightly on Rex's neck. "Easy. What do you hear?" The dog didn't blink. The cabin's front door was slightly open, not enough to seem accidental, enough to signal intrusion. Ethan's pulse sharpened. He approached the porch with silent precision, the instinctive calm of a man who had walked into hostile buildings on 3 continents. The wind shifted, carrying muffled voices from inside, angry, low, the kind of tone used by men who enjoyed breaking things simply because no one had stopped them before. He signaled Rex to stay low, then stepped into the doorway. The living room was overturned, a lamp shattered, chairs knocked aside. Papers, Lily's schoolwork, Martha's old notebooks, grocery lists, scattered like fallen leaves, and in the middle of the chaos stood 3 men in heavy coats, their features hardened by the bitterness of long grudges. One held a crowbar, another kicked over the small shelf Ethan had tidied the day before, and the third was rummaging through drawers with frantic, destructive energy. It took Ethan less than a second to understand. These weren't random vandals. These were men connected to Jackson Rosewood's past, men who blamed his imprisonment on betrayals he never had the chance to explain, men who now saw the grandmother and little girl not as innocents, but as targets. At that moment, Lily appeared from the bedroom doorway, her small frame barely visible. The crowbar-wielding man noticed her first. "There she is," he muttered. "The kid. Let's grab her and send a message to her father." Lily froze like a wounded fawn. This wasn't fear of strangers. This was the fear of someone who knew exactly what cruelty looked like. Before Ethan could step forward, the man grabbed her arm roughly. Lily cried out, a sound that ripped through the house like something breaking in two. Ethan's voice emerged low, controlled, but cold enough to freeze the air. "Let her go!" 3 pairs of eyes snapped toward him. One of the men snorted, mistaking him for a passerby. "And who the hell are you supposed to be?" Ethan didn't raise his voice, didn't need to. "The last mistake you're going to make tonight." Rex lunged first, not to attack, but to place himself between Lily and the men. His protection was absolute, wordless, primal. The man holding Lily stumbled back, startled by the sudden interposition of muscle and teeth, loosening his grip just enough for Lily to slip free and scramble behind a toppled table. Ethan moved next, crossing the distance in a few strides. Years of training turned the scene into a fluid blur. He sidestepped the swing of the crowbar, grabbed the attacker's wrist, twisted, and sent the weapon clattering to the floor. The second man charged with blind anger, only to find himself pinned against the wall with Ethan's forearm at his throat. The third bolted toward the doorway, but Rex cut him off with a deep growl that froze him mid-step. Not a bark, just a promise. Ethan released the man he'd subdued and stepped between the intruders and the girl. "You're done here," he said. "Leave. This family has suffered enough." But the leader spat on the floor. "You think you can protect them? Jackson Rosewood ruined us. That kid's going to pay for—" He didn't finish the sentence. Ethan's punch landed quick and decisive, dropping him to the floor. The other 2 scrambled to drag him out the door, muttering threats that sounded hollow compared to the fury that had nearly consumed the house minutes earlier. Once they were gone, Ethan locked the door and checked the windows. His breathing steadied before he turned toward Lily. She was still crouched behind the overturned table, her knees pulled to her chest, her eyes wide with a terror too old for her age. "Are you hurt?" Ethan asked softly. Lily shook her head, then crawled toward him and threw her arms around his waist in a silent plea for safety. Rex pressed in beside her, nudging her hand with his nose. Ethan lifted the girl gently, his voice quiet but steady. "You're safe now. No one's going to touch you again." Behind them, Martha had woken, confused and frightened by the noise. She wandered into the room, eyes unfocused, asking what was happening. The distressed worry on her face nearly broke Ethan's composure. This woman had tried with everything she had, but she was losing battles her mind no longer knew how to fight. Lily reached for her grandmother, clinging to her with shaking hands. Martha whispered apologies, half-formed, incoherent words tangled with fear. Ethan spent another hour setting the house back in order, checking to be sure no intruders remained, calming the grandmother and reassuring Lily until her trembling quieted. The storm outside deepened, flakes drifting heavily past the windows. Rex lay near the door, ears still alert, refusing to rest. It was only when the cabin felt warm again that Ethan finally prepared to leave. He placed a soft hand on Lily's shoulder. "I'll check on you in the morning," he said. "This won't happen again." But as he stepped onto the porch, he paused. Something in the woods moved. Too slow for an animal, too deliberate for the wind, someone had been watching, waiting. Ethan's jaw tightened. He understood then that tonight was only the beginning. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Night drifted slowly over Fairbanks, the winter darkness thick and unbroken as Ethan Walker drove back toward town with Rex resting silently beside him. The headlights carved two narrow tunnels through the snow, but his mind was elsewhere, circling the memory of 3 intruders tearing apart the rosewood cabin, the sight of Lily trembling behind a table, the confusion in Martha's fading eyes. No matter how many miles of battlefield he had crossed, nothing had unsettled him quite like the quiet terror of a child who believed no one would come. By the time he returned to his temporary lodging on the edge of town, Ethan felt the familiar burnout of adrenaline draining, replaced by something else. Responsibility. Not assigned, not ordered, but chosen. He stood in the cold for several minutes before entering, letting the wind steady him. Rex sat by the door, watchful, sensing the shift in his handler's thoughts. "Yeah," Ethan murmured, "we're in this now." The next morning he woke early and drove back to the cabin with 2 thermoses of soup and a box of groceries. But before he reached the house, he saw a vehicle already parked outside, a county sedan dusted with frost. Standing in front of the cabin was a man Ethan immediately recognized from the brief file he had skimmed last night. Jackson Rosewood, recently released on probation. He had arrived a month early, perhaps to hide from the people who wanted him dead, or perhaps out of guilt. Ethan wasn't sure. Jackson stood stiffly, as if unsure whether he should knock or turn around and leave. His jaw was tense, and his hands fidgeted as though they were used to holding something heavier than regret. When he noticed Ethan approaching, he stiffened defensively. "You the one who called me?" he asked. Ethan shook his head. "No, I'm the one who stopped your daughter from being taken last night." Jackson went still, the color draining from his face. "Taken? By who?" Ethan stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Old enemies of yours? The kind who don't care that you're trying to turn your life around?" Jackson cursed under his breath. Shame flickered across his features, not shame for what others had done, but shame for having brought danger to the only family he had left. He ran a hand over his face, his voice cracking slightly. "I never wanted them near her." Ethan studied him. There was fear in Jackson's eyes, but not the kind that came from cowardice. It was the fear of a man realizing a lifetime of bad choices had finally landed on the doorstep of the person he loved most. "If you're here for her," Ethan said, "then go inside. She needs you." They entered the cabin together. Lily immediately froze where she sat beside her grandmother, her shoulders tightening as though bracing for another attack. But when she recognized the man who stepped through the door, her expression fractured. Shock, fear, anger, then something older than any child should feel, hurt. "Daddy?" she whispered. Jackson's knees nearly buckled. He sank down in front of her, tears welling despite every effort to hold them back. "Lily, sweetheart, I'm so sorry." The girl didn't throw her arms around him. Instead, she studied him with unsettling maturity. "Why did you come back?" she asked. "You left us. Grandma said you made mistakes, and that's why people were angry." Jackson swallowed hard. "I came back because I should have been here all along." Lily's lips trembled. "Grandma almost died, and they came to hurt us, and I was so scared. Where were you?" Ethan stepped back, giving them room as the words hung painfully between father and daughter. It wasn't anger Lily carried. It was exhaustion, the exhaustion of a child who had survived too much silence. Martha, confused and disoriented, muttered incoherent phrases from the couch. Jackson looked at his mother, his face collapsing with guilt when he saw her frailty. "Mom, what happened to you?" Martha didn't answer. She stared at him blankly, unable to place him. The realization hit Jackson like a physical blow. Ethan spoke gently. "Her memory's slipping fast. She's been trying to take care of Lily alone. And Lily, she's been carrying more than any 5-year-old ever should." Jackson pressed a shaking hand to his face. "God, what have I done?" Rex walked over to Lily and nudged her knee, reminding her she wasn't alone. She buried one hand in the dog's fur, drawing strength from the quiet steadiness he offered. The rest of the afternoon passed in the slow unraveling of truth. Ethan explained what happened the night before, the broken furniture, the threats, the men who wanted revenge. Jackson listened in horrified silence. When Ethan finished, Jackson spoke in a voice strained with desperation. "I need to take them somewhere safe, maybe out of state, maybe—" "No," Ethan said softly. "Running won't fix this, and Lily doesn't need more chaos. She needs stability." Jackson covered his face with both hands. "I don't know if I'm enough for that." Lily watched him quietly. It was the same look she had given Ethan on the day they met, a look searching for truth beneath the words. "Are you staying?" she asked. Jackson lowered his hands and looked at her. "If you'll let me, yes." She hesitated, then nodded once, cautiously. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was the first step. Ethan checked the windows again, making sure everything was secure. His instincts still prickled. The men from the night before wouldn't simply disappear. They would regroup. They would return. But now Jackson was here, haunted, flawed, but determined, and Lily needed him. As evening settled over the cabin, the four of them sat at the small wooden table while Ethan heated soup and Jackson helped Martha drink warm tea. It wasn't a peaceful scene, but it was the beginning of something, fragile and necessary. When the meal ended, Ethan stood and put on his jacket. Lily turned to him immediately. "Are you leaving?" "For now," Ethan said, "but I'll be back tomorrow." "Promise?" Ethan met her gaze. Promise. She reached for Rex, hugging him briefly. The dog licked her cheek, then returned to Ethan's side. As Ethan opened the door to leave, a gust of wind shook the trees, and from the darkness beyond the porch he felt a presence, still watching, still waiting. He didn't say anything, but he and Rex understood the same thing at the same moment. This wasn't over, not even close. He closed the door behind him, knowing Chapter 6 would demand the hardest choices from everyone. The first light of morning barely reached the forest floor when Ethan Walker once again returned to the Rosewood cabin. The faint orange glow smeared across the snowy treetops made the world look fragile, as if one wrong breath could shatter it. The events of the previous nights weighed heavily on him. Lily's trembling voice, Martha's fading memory, the violent intrusion, and Jackson's unexpected return. It all felt like the aftermath of a battlefield, except this time the casualties weren't soldiers, but a family trying desperately to survive their own history. Rex walked beside Ethan with the quiet discipline of a seasoned guardian, but there was a tension in the dog's movements, a certain sharpness in the way he scanned the edges of the woods. Whatever lingered out there had not gone far, and both of them knew it. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere was calmer than before. The damage had been cleaned up, the fire burned warm, and Lily sat by the table drawing pictures with crayons, something she hadn't done since the world began to collapse beneath her feet. She heard Ethan step inside and immediately looked up. A smile flickered across her face, small and cautious, but real. "You came back?" she whispered. Ethan nodded. "I said I would." Jackson stood near the stove preparing breakfast, his movements stiff with the awkwardness of a man trying to relearn normal life. He glanced over at Ethan with a mixture of gratitude and guilt. "Morning. I didn't expect you this early." Ethan shrugged. Old habits die hard. What he didn't say was that he barely slept, the image of those men circling the cabin replaying in his mind. Martha sat wrapped in a blanket, her eyes dim and distant. Some mornings she was almost clear. Today she seemed lost in a fog only she could see. Lily moved between her father and grandmother with instinctive care, helping Jackson stir the pot, offering Martha a warm cloth for her hands. She had become the glue holding the broken pieces together, and Ethan felt a familiar ache in his chest watching her. Children like her carried burdens silently, long before anyone noticed they were too heavy. After breakfast, Jackson stepped outside with Ethan, closing the door behind them. The cold hit instantly, sharp enough to bite. "I know you didn't have to come back," Jackson said quietly, "but I'm glad you did. Lily, she trusts you." Ethan crossed his arms, breath fogging in the air. "She needed someone when no one else showed up?" Jackson nodded, his eyes heavy with remorse. "I don't deserve her trust, not yet, but I want to try." Ethan studied him. The man was raw with regret, and underneath the hardness was a father trying to climb out of a hole he had dug with his own hands. "Trying is a start," Ethan said. Before Jackson could answer, Rex growled, deep, instinctive, warning. Both men turned. A figure stood at the tree line, half hidden behind the branches, not moving, not approaching, just watching. Ethan's hand moved instinctively to the small firearm holstered under his jacket. Jackson stiffened. "Them again?" Ethan inhaled slowly. "Maybe, or someone working with them. They'll wait until they think the house is unguarded." Jackson's jaw tightened. "I can't put her through this again. I need to protect her. I have to." Ethan nodded. Then do it the right way. Stay close. Fix what you broke. Keep her safe. Jackson swallowed hard. And you? Ethan glanced at the shadow in the trees. I'm not leaving town yet. Hours passed as they repaired the broken lock on the door, secured windows, and checked the perimeter. The winter sun dipped early behind the hills, casting long, cold shadows across the snow. The cabin glowed warmly from inside, voices soft and steady, Lily reading to Martha, Jackson chopping vegetables for dinner, Rex asleep near the fire. For once, the home felt like a home. Later, when the sky turned twilight blue, Lily approached Ethan as he prepared to leave. She held one of her drawings, a simple picture of the cabin with 4 figures and a dog standing in front of it. Ethan, Martha, Lily, Jackson, and Rex. This is us, she said shyly, when you come back next time. He knelt so they were eye level. I'll always come back, he said. Whenever I finish my missions, this will be the first place I go. Lily threw her arms around his neck, clinging to him with the desperate trust of someone who had learned too early that people leave. Ethan held her tightly, grounding her, steadying her. Rex pressed his head against her leg, as if joining the promise. When she let go, Jackson stepped forward. I know I can't undo what I did to her, but I'll make it right. She deserves better. Ethan nodded. Then give her consistency. That's what she needs now. The wind howled through the trees as Ethan walked back to his truck. Not coming with me this time, huh? He asked Rex. The dog looked back toward the cabin, then returned to Ethan's side, tail low, alert and loyal. Before he climbed into the truck, Ethan took one last look at the house. Light glowed behind the windows. A father trying to rebuild trust, a grandmother fighting memories slipping like frost from her hands, a child learning, finally, that she was not alone. He could leave now. The danger wasn't gone, but it was no longer pressing against the door. Jackson would stand between Lily and the world, and Ethan would return, after each mission, after each deployment, always back to this snowy corner of Alaska where a little girl waited with a drawing in her hands. As he drove down the icy road, Rex leaned against him, and Ethan whispered, We'll be back soon, buddy. Some promises matter more than orders. Behind them, the cabin lights burned through the darkness, a fragile, flickering miracle of a family beginning again. But neither Ethan nor Rex noticed the second figure emerging silently from the trees after the truck disappeared. Someone new, someone who had not been there the night before. The game wasn't over, it was only shifting. And Ethan would find out soon enough. In the frozen silence of Alaska, where loneliness settles deeper than the snow, a little girl found her family again, not because of luck, but because God placed the right hearts in the right place at the right time. A Navy SEAL on leave, a loyal dog, a father seeking redemption, none of them arrived by accident. They were guided gently and quietly toward one fragile child who needed them. Sometimes God's miracles don't come with thunder or flashes of light. Sometimes they come as a knock on the door, a stranger who chooses kindness, a promise kept, a father who decides to fight his way back home. Lily's story reminds us that even in our darkest winters, God is working silently, patiently, through ordinary people who carry extraordinary love. And if you're watching this now, remember, your own miracle may already be on its way, hidden in a moment you haven't noticed yet. Share this story if it touched your heart. Leave a comment if you believe hope still has power. and subscribe to join us in spreading faith, compassion, and the quiet miracles God gives to those who need them most. May God bless you and your family today, tomorrow, and always.